A continuación, nuestro siguiente invitado, él es el representante de la editorial National Geographic and Cengage, Jair Felix, National Geographic Learning Senior ELT Academic Consultant from Latin America. He has a BA in TEFL from Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa in Mexico and a postgraduate degree on teachers development from the College of St. Mark's and St. John, Plymouth, UK. Jay has been involved in language teaching and teacher training for over 23 years and has conducted workshops on various topics such as lesson planning, discourse analysis for language teachers, action research, educational technologies, and 21st century skills, among others. Jair holds a diploma in teaching English for specific purposes and the E-Tutoring certificate from the British Council. He's a frequent presenter at ELT conferences throughout Latin America. So let's welcome him, Jair.
Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon. Greetings from Northwest Mexico. I hope you're all doing great. And I'll start by sharing my screen. As you heard, my name's Jair Felix, and I work for National Geographic Learning as the head of the Academic Services Department in Latin America. And the emphasis of our session this evening has to do with the power of content and how real-world content enhances and enriches the practice of English language teaching and learning. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes. We're going to explore about how real-world content in its many forms can be a powerful tool for language teaching and learning. And in case you're wondering, we're going to be analyzing a lot of images, and we're going to be watching some real-world video, including the one that you have on your screens right now, where you can see people in special containment suits that explore the massive beams of selenite inside the Cave of Crystals in Nica mine here in Mexico. And it might look cold, but the temperature inside the mine can reach 58 degrees Celsius with 99% humidity. So it's everything but cold down there, right? And so that is the set of content that we're going to be talking about today, how powerful image, powerful video, powerful storytelling can enrich and enhance the practice of English in and out of the classroom. And of course, all of the content that I'm going to be showcasing in my presentation today comes from National Geographic Archive of Resources. At the end, we're National Geographic Learning. We're the academic educational arm of the National Geographic Society. And the reason for us to exist, if you may, is to inspire the future generation of leaders and decision makers to be better caretakers of the planet and each other, and enable them to be successful and responsible citizens of the 21st century as they learn and master English. So what we're going to be talking about today has to do with the possibility of enriching our students' comprehension and knowledge, not only with the grammar and the vocabulary of language, which is pretty much essential, but also with real-world content that would inspire them to make better decisions, to take better care of the planet, and to become leaders of 21st century endeavors as they learn and master the most global and most popular and multicultural language of our times, which is English. Our philosophy, as Benjamin was telling you before, is bringing the world to the classroom and your classrooms to life. And we do all that through the power of real world content. And so I want for us to focus for a second on one specific aspect, which is life before the pandemic. And I'm gonna present a set of data to you. I want you to pay attention to the data that you have on your screens right now. And this is all pre-pandemic, pre-COVID data. And the data reads, the world's population grows by about 200,000 people. More than 8 million people travel by plane. About 200,000 people move into cities. More than 4 billion people communicate with others through their cell phones. Social media website Facebook connects over 1 billion people, and people upload more than 576,000 hours of video to YouTube. Now, my question to you, and you can answer this through the chat box, my question to you is, how often do you think this happened? What was the periodicity of this data? So more than 8 million people traveled by plane before the pandemic. How often? Every day, every week, every month, every year? What do you think the periodicity of this data is? More than 4 billion people communicated with others with their cell phones before the pandemic. How often do you think that happened? Okay, and let's see. Oh, Natalie says every day. And you're absolutely right. This was the state of the world before the pandemic. And of course, some of this data was drastically minimized and diminished because of the pandemic. And some of this data was dramatically uplifted because of the pandemic. So for example, during the pandemic and even nowadays, we don't have 8 million people traveling by plane anymore. That number decreased dramatically. But we have far more than 4 billion people communicating with others with their cell phones because of the lockdown. So some numbers were affected, but the point of this set of data is to demonstrate how pretty much globally interconnected we are. How the world now more than ever has become a global village. And there's no limits to interconnectivity and getting familiar with what's happening in the four corners of the world with just the snap of a screen by simply accessing the internet, right? This is who we are, and this is what we do, and the sort of world that we live in right now. This is pretty much the sort of reality that our students have to face daily. And as Natalie said in the chat box, this happened every day. Then the pandemic hit, and the world was drastically changed. And we're now seeing the effects of that change in education as well. And we were even capable of analyzing some of those new changes and new realities in education because of globalization and interconnectivity, even before the pandemic. Just before the pandemic, the OECD released a document that's entitled Teaching for Global Competence in a Rapidly Changing World. And they stated as the conclusion of such document, they stated that globalization, the digital revolution, mass migration, the prospect of climate instability, and nowadays the pandemic as well, are triggering new concerns and demanding a new kind of graduate. That means that what our students need from us, from our classes, and from the materials that are presented and used in classrooms has little to do with what was popular 10, 15, or 20 years ago. There's a need for an evolution, for a revolution of the way English is taught in classes in order for students to learn and develop skills that are necessary in English to access a brighter future, right? And so the world is already demanding for a new kind of graduate. And that means that we as educators have to present them with a new set of skills, a new set of content. So what does that mean? Specifically, what kind of skills do school leavers really need? And not that long ago, the World Economic Forum conducted a survey among hundreds of CEOs, and they asked them this simple questions. What kind of skills are today's employers looking for? What skills are most desired by employers nowadays? If your students are graduating from colleges and universities or high schools, and they go out looking for a job, knocking on different companies and different factories and different offices' doors, what do you think the skills that employers and human resources managers are going to be looking for in them? Any ideas? Can you think of any specific skill that you think it's important, it's widely desired by employers nowadays? Can you let me know about your ideas in the chat box? What skills are really important? Natalie says everyday, soft skills. Soft skills such as, and I know what you mean by soft skills, and I've always joked on how those soft skills are everything but soft, right? They're the ones that are pretty much determining the future of our planet. But I totally see what you mean, Natalie, and you're absolutely right. There's an emphasis on soft skills among the skills that are searched after by employers. Absolutely. Teamwork, critical thinking, leadership, cooperation, teamwork. Absolutely. When I first read this question, when I was reading through the report that the World Economic Forum issued, I was certain that English or multilingualism, or even at least bilingualism, was going to be part of this, and also the good handling of digital technologies. I was expecting for those two skills related to language and the handling of technology, were going to be included on the list. And to my surprise, this was the top 5 that was issued as a result of this survey. Number 5 was the ability to coordinate with others. Apparently, what employers, what industries, companies are looking for nowadays is people with abilities to collaborate with each other. People with abilities to reach consensus, to reach agreements among them so that they can work in a coordinated way. So people employers are looking for people with abilities to collaborate and work in teams effectively. And they're also looking for people with abilities to manage teams. So it's not only a good team player, but also a good team leader, what they're looking for. Okay. Then they mentioned creativity. People with abilities to create something out. And I would like to make a pause here, because for a lot of us, creativity has only to do with imagination. A person with good imagination is typically labeled as a creative person, when in reality, creativity, it's not only having the ability to create vivid mental pictures, if you know what I mean, but rather is the ability to take that mental picture, take that process that you imagined up in your head, and convert that into a process that would allow for something to be created, something that it's tangible, something that it's measurable. So creativity has to do with doing, with creating, with producing. The root of the term is create, right? So they're looking for creative people, people with the ability to devise a process mentally and then follow the steps to create something out, to create an outcome. Critical thinking is on the very top of our list. The ability to read between the lines, the ability to ask the right questions and challenge the assumption, it's essential as well. And number 1, complex problem solving. And that includes also resilience and motivation, and not feel threatened by problems, but rather have the right attitude towards solving problems in a variety of ways, right? So those are the things that employers are looking for nowadays. Those are the things that our students need to start developing, the skills that our students need to start developing as part of our everyday classes nowadays. So as you can see, we as language teachers have much more to do than just the typical grammar lesson or vocabulary lesson or pronunciation practice. Through the teaching of English, we can totally help our students develop abilities for thinking critically, communicate effectively, collaborate successfully, and devise creative solutions to problems, right? And this doesn't mean that we should forget about our more traditional approaches to language teaching and learning. No, your core subject is English. And so you gotta keep on teaching English. And yes, there's always a room for the grammar, the vocabulary, and the pronunciation that we typically practice in the language. And we gotta do it through listening and reading comprehension and oral production and written production. Absolutely, that's the core of our subject. But in order to help students deal with the requests of 21st century of this world that we live in, we have to pair those traditional and core aspects of our teaching with learning and innovation skills, with 21st century skills, including, again, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And perhaps even more importantly, because of the subject that we teach, we have to also include interculturality, allowing for students to become familiar with the role of English as a truly global, a truly international language. And through intercultural content, we can promote creativity, innovation, critical thinking, communication at a very high level, right? So that has to do with the power of real intercultural content. And so just thinking on this, I have yet another question for you. You know that English is the global language of our times. On ratio of native to non-native speakers currently using English, what percentage of the world's users of English are non-native speakers? We know that there are over 2 billion people in this planet speaking in English right now. Over 2 billion people speaking in English. My question is, out of this 2 billion, what percentage would be native and non-native speakers of English? Or more specifically, what percentage of the world's users of English are non-native speakers of English? I see the chat's blinking. 60 non-native, 70 non-native. Thank you for sharing your answers. Absolutely. And you're getting close. Both the US State Department and the British Council have agreed on a ratio of 80 to 20. That means that 80% of the people that speak English in the world right now are non-native speakers of English. And only 20% of English speakers in the world are native speakers of the language, right? That means that only about 360 to 370 million speakers of English are native users of the language. It also means that the largest English-speaking country in the world is China right now. There's more people in China speaking English than there's people speaking English in the US and the UK combined. The only distinction is that Chinese English speakers are non-native. But that in the world that we live in this global village that we live in right now, is of very little importance. Having a native accent doesn't really matter that much. What really matters is your ability to comply and your ability to pass on your thoughts and your ideas in English cohesively, coherently, competitively, right? And so globalization and the fact that we're living in this global village has led to a diverse range of Englishes nowadays, right? And so a globally competent user of English shouldn't look for perfect pronunciation, but rather solid abilities to pass on and comprehend thoughts and ideas coherently, right? And so there are a lot of research and a lot of studies on how being a native or a non-native is no longer a point of discussion. What really matters is your global abilities for handling with the language. And so there are very important and interesting steps that have been taken into making English a more global practice, and including what's happening with PISA, the PISA exam. I don't know if you're familiar with PISA, but this is labeled as the world's most important exam. And they analyze students' knowledge and abilities on math, science, and language globally. And as of the latest version of the PISA exam, issued in 2018, they're now including a full section on global competence. They're testing not only your knowledge of language or math or science, but they're also testing your global abilities for using such knowledge. And so my third question for you would be, what skills do globally competent students need to have? What do you think are those skills that the PISA exam and a lot of different organizations are referring to when they talk about global competence, a global competence framework? We're very familiar with language abilities, with language competence and language skills. We're very familiar with the reading skill, the writing skill, the speaking skill, the listening skill. But according to this, there's a new layer, if you may, of skills that are of equal importance for students to achieve global success nowadays. So knowing the mechanics of English is no longer enough. You got to know how to use English successfully in order to access the world and everything in it. What do you think those global competences might be? Any ideas? Let's see the chat again. Analyzing, making inferences, summarizing, absolutely. Fantastic, Isabella. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Analyzing, making inferences, summarizing, which you could perhaps wrap around the idea of critical thinking, right? Making analysis, making inferences, having the ability to summarize, they all have to do with critical thinking, absolutely. And so the OECD, and again, the PISA exam, issued this global competence framework that include knowledge, values, attitudes, and skills. And they talk about this sort of skills that are needed in order for a student to be considered globally competent. And this is a framework that we pay particular attention to at National Geographic Learning. Our goal with the course materials we create is not only to develop language learners or learners' language skills, but also to help them develop important 21st century skills and competences, such as, again, critical thinking or intercultural communication or global awareness. So how can we get our students interested in global, local, and intercultural issues so that they want to communicate and share their own ideas and perspectives using English? And the answer to that question has to do with real world content. Content that allows for students to get familiar in English with global topics. Content that allow for students to see different perspectives of the world in English. Content that invites, that promotes, that incites students taking action in order to make our world a more sustainable place. And of course, and at the core of our programs, content, real world content that triggers effective communication desires, right? And so global topics, different perspectives, a call for action, and the ability to develop effective communication are essential to the philosophy of National Geographic learning. And this is what we aim for when we create materials and when we train teachers on how to make the best out of training students to develop global competences. So, talking about examining local, global, and intercultural issues, what we're always looking for is the power of interest. So let's look at the importance of interest in the classroom. According to Paul Sylvia of the University of North Carolina, when something is interesting, we pay closer attention, we process the information more efficiently, we employ more effective learning strategies, such as engaging in critical thinking and making connections between old and new knowledge. And overall, when we're interested in a task, we work harder and persist longer. Real world content allow for students to become interested in the practice of language, and they pay closer attention, and they process information more efficiently, and they use more effective learning strategies. They work harder, they persist longer when they're interested, right? But you might say that what is interesting to one student may not be interesting to the next, perhaps, when in reality, interesting things generally share a number of characteristics, right? What makes something interesting? Again, according to Sylvia, to be interesting, material, the content that you present to your students must be novel, complex, and comprehensible. So when you present content to your students and you make sure that that content is novel, that is, it doesn't mean new, but it means content that your students were not that aware of or didn't know much about before. Content that it's novel, content that it's complex, that is, that it challenges them, that it requires for them to pay a bit more of attention, to focus for longer. But at the same time, content that it's comprehensible, that they can truly digest and become interested in. Novelty, complexity, and comprehensibility are essential to developing or selecting the right content for teaching English in the 21st century. So, how do we choose content for our language learning materials at National Geographic Learning? Well, central to everything we do at National Geographic Learning is selecting content that engages and that acts as a springboard for the kind of language learning and skills acquisition we want our students of all ages to experience. How do we choose that content? Well, we always look for content that it's, number one, authentic, content that it's global, and content that it's relevant. And let me show you quickly what we mean by these words, by content that it's authentic, global, and relevant. When we talk about content that it's authentic, we talk about topics that are real world topics. Topics that your students might be familiar with or that might found meaningful, purposeful, and relevant to their lives. Content that it's not only applicable on conversations in the classroom, but rather content that they can use for researching and developing further in real life situations. Content that it's authentic, content that it's global. And this does not mean exotic. It means featuring people from all over the world doing everyday things and doing also inspiring things. So, for example, here we have Panut Hadisiswoyo, a conservationist at the Orangutan Information Center in Sumatra, in Indonesia. And we also have Wasfia Nasreen, a mountain climber, an activist, and a writer from Bangladesh. And we also see Anand Bardma, science photographer from the US. And we use them as role models for practicing the language, but also for developing skills and abilities that have to do with creativity, with collaboration, with motivation, with resilience. Content that it's global, it's not only the cute little picture or content that it's only applicable in classroom settings. It's bringing the world to the classroom. And with that, bringing your classrooms to life. And of course, the content needs to be global, but it also needs to be relevant. Relevant topics. Topics that are developmentally appropriate. Topics that would allow for students to develop skills that are important to them beyond just the English class. Content that has to do with health and happiness, or teaching girls bravery and not perfection, or following fads and analyzing trends in the world, etc., etc. So all of those content that is content that it's authentic, content that it's global, content that it's relevant is essential to empower your students to use English successfully in the 21st century. And of course, as you can tell, we use a lot of photos and a lot of infographics. And we believe at National Geographic Learning that learning to read pictures seems to be hardwired, if you may, into us. As children, we learn to read images months before we become verbal and years before we attempt to become fluent in written language. So our strengthening our students' innate ability to identify, read, and understand images, or in other words, to be visually literate, is a natural scaffolding for language learning. So we believe that in order to teach English in the 21st century, you gotta help students develop that visual literacy, that ability to decode, comprehend, and produce language from images as well, right? And so photographs can provide a wow effect. Photographs can intrigue, showing unusual places or situations can draw students in, and that causes them to reach for associations and understanding through prior experiences and knowledge. Sometimes starting with the simple question, wow, where is that? And you show that to your students and you allow for them to develop further attention and look closely and start paying attention to the reading in order to find answers to their initial questions after they've analyzed the image. All of that can happen with the power of an image. Imagine, for example, presenting a photo like this to your students and asking students questions such as, how does this photo make you feel? What do you imagine the photographer was trying to capture? And what if I told you Joel Sartori, the National Geographic photographer, took this photo for the photo art project, where he's trying to photograph as many endangered species as possible. Does that change how you feel about the photo? It perhaps allows you to create an emotional connection towards it. And according to Serena Triaca, the potential of photography is more than being simply a reproduction of reality. The potential can be found in its ambiguity, in its ability to connect with our emotions, to invoke deduction, speculation, or even fantasy. So when we use those powerful images, those powerful photos to introduce a topic, to capture your students' attention, you're not only developing visual literacy, you're also provoking the ideal state for language acquisition. And that should always be our ultimate goal when teaching the language. And we know that great photos can aid in comprehension. Great photos can get students talking. Great photos can drive meaningful communication in and out of the classroom. But how can looking at pictures make my students better readers and writers, perhaps? How can we take the power of an image further to help our students develop reading and writing skills? Well, simply by using the power of it. Take a look at this image that you have on the screen right now. And imagine using this picture in your classroom and asking your students things like, what's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? Do you agree with your partner's opinion or not? Why? What do you think the person in the car down here is thinking? What more can you find? Etc., etc., etc. And these are, deceptively simple open-ended questions. The goal is to help students identify detail and make observations. Practicing visual thinking skills with these images can be fun and quickly or trigger a quick activity, but it can also help students develop reading and writing skills. So you can have your students use those visual skills in order to slow down, to be more methodical, to notice details, to make connections, to ask questions, to build on others' observations, to use personal knowledge of the world to figure out what's happening in the photo. And the thing is that too often students want to hurry up and make meaning via a quick skim or a cursory glance, if you know what I mean, when reading a text. And visual skills can transfer and help them to be better readers and better writers. We want for students to slow down, to be more methodical, to notice details, to ask questions, to make connections. Are those skills useful in reading and writing? Of course they are. And so the power of real world photo, of real world images, of real world video is applicable to not only listening and speaking, but reading and writing as well. So in that sense, you are covering the full approach, the full spectrum that we talked about before. You're not only dealing with language skills, but you're also dealing with 21st century innovative skills. At the end, what we do at National Geographic Learning and what we recommend teachers to pay attention to is the things that would drive students' attention, that would capture students' motivation. And through photos, real world photos, you can do that. You can show the real world. You can have students develop human interest in the topic of the class, and you can arouse their curiosity. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. I'm going to show you some images, and I want you to tell me what you think in the chat box. Let's take a look at these two images. Which of the two is more real world? They're trying to represent the same, a group of children having fun. Which is more real world? The one in the right. Thank you, Isabella. Exactly. Letter B. Thank you, Natalie. Fantastic. Why is it more real world? Because it's authentic. Because picture B is authentic. It has a sense of realism that you can't see on A. A is a beautiful photo, but it looks staged. B is a far more authentic photo, right? Now, which has more human interest of these two? A or B? Which has more human interest? What would you say? A, exactly. They're both representing perhaps the same, right? People in water. But then letter A perhaps is depicting a situation that could happen, which is perhaps someone in the middle of a flooding. Whereas letter B, it doesn't even look real at all. It's completely staged, right? And then finally, which of these two inspires curiosity? Which inspires curiosity of the two? What would you say, A or B? Okay. A, exactly. Whereas letter B looks like a catalog photo. Letter A is a real photo of a janitor dusting an exhibition at a museum. That's what's happening in letter A, right? It's a real photo, an authentic photo, showing the usual in an unusual way. And that's what we need to do in order to help our students develop interest in the topics that we're presenting in our classes, showing the usual in an unusual way. Because in that way, we're also going to be helping our students get ready. Because fortune, according to Louis Pasteur, fortune favors the prepared mind. It's not a matter of luck. It's a matter of preparation and knowledge. And to be prepared for today's workforce, informed about important issues, and able to understand the complex world we live in, all people must have a solid and global education in science, mathematics, and technology. So it is about time that we start talking about real world topics in science, in technology, in art, in history, as we teach the most global of all languages, which is English. Let me give you an example. An example of a global topic perhaps might be bee colony collapse, right? A topic that is of all humans' interest, how bee colonies are collapsing all over the world, how we're destroying the ecosystem for bees to survive. Would that work to drive communication in a language learning classroom? Well, it depends, right? If you presented that information by means of using a chart like this, if you just put a chart like this in front of your students, probably they're not going to be interested at all. They're not going to pay attention to it. But if you established a discussion through communication, through collaboration, through critical thinking, and you presented an image like this, an information graphic like this, and you told your students, okay, guys, I'd like to have you focus on food, and let's discuss in pairs. What foods have you eaten recently that would be gone if bees disappeared? And then they read, they analyze, and they start developing an awareness that exceeds linguistic acquisition, that gets into getting real world knowledge, real world content to enhance their everyday behavior. It's interesting, right? You learn something new about a fairly complex topic, the impact of bees on what we eat. And it was made comprehensible with images and text. And you also help students collaborate, think critically and creatively, and communicate with each other with a topic that would be otherwise difficult for them to understand. So this has also to do with the power of real world content. Today, creators of high stakes tests have taken note of the growing importance of the visual content, beginning with test takers of the SAT exam, for example. Students now encounter graphics, not only in the math section, but also in the reading, writing, and language section. So if that's included in an exam as important as SAT or PISA, perhaps it is about time that we start presenting students with visual literacy practice as they learn and practice English. Because at the end, images and text have an added advantage over text alone. As dual coding takes place in the memory, it is easier for the student to make cross connections between the two different codes and later retrieve information. Researchers at the University of Twente in the Netherlands studied the neurological activity in students and found that graphs elicited roughly 60% more electrical activity than text or equations, and 40 to 50% more than pictures and tables. So it's been demonstrated, scientifically demonstrated, that when students encounter infographics like this on the screen, it's easy to imagine their brains lighting up like a street in Tokyo, for example. It's the acquisition happens at a far faster and more solid way. And of course, being able to read and understand information graphics is a key skill for success in higher education, in careers, and daily life in general. We got to remember that we live in a data-rich world with graphics popping up in everything from advertising to political campaigns to household bills. So being a confident consumer of that information is critical. I would also say that being a critical consumer of information is also essentially important. So take a look at this information graphic. Does something look not quite right? This is an official graphic issued by Microsoft. But when we first saw it, we detected that something was not quite right in it. What is wrong with this graphic? Any idea? Look at the proportions in the charts. How many rows are needed to represent 100 million? It's 3 and looks like a half, right? But then when you look at 117 million, it turns out that we're doubling up the bar, but we're only talking about 17 million extra. So the proportion is off. See what I mean by this? So we need to start helping our students analyze this critically through authentic, global, relevant content. And that's what we do at National Geographic Learning. And so as part of this idea, we also put a lot of attention to the concept of critical thinking. Globally competent learners can or should be able to access, analyze, and critically evaluate messages delivered through media. Critical thinking is very important. A key aspect of global competence is now critical thinking. For centuries, English language teaching has included what's known as lower order thinking skills. We want for our students to memorize English, to understand the language, and at some point to develop abilities to apply the language successfully. But according to Bloom's taxonomy, these are just basic comprehension skills. In order for our students to reach higher order thinking skills, to develop abilities to create language on their own, they have to first analyze and evaluate language critically. Critical thinking is essential. And nowadays, and now more than ever, because of the infodemic we all have experienced over the past few years, it is of extremely high importance for our students not only to memorize the language, but being able to analyze it and evaluate it further and use it as a springboard into more creative aspects of language. Okay? And so with that in mind, we started researching on critical thinking. And we now know that most students simply have very little in the way of critical evaluation skills. And students may tell you they don't believe everything they read on the internet. They don't believe in everything they get on their WhatsApp messages. But guess what? They do. And so it is of extreme importance as we teach the most global and popular language of our times to help our students develop critical thinking skills. We don't want for them to be like the people that took part on this project that was originally released a few years ago. There was this project in which a web page was created, and there was some advertisement on a campaign for helping save the endangered Pacific Northwest tree octopus from extinction. Have you ever heard of an octopus that lives on trees? Where do octopus typically live? Do they live in water, in the ocean? Do they live on up in the mountains? Do they fly up in the skies? Do they live on trees? Where do they live? And of course, you can now tell me, well, that's a pretty obvious question. Octopus live in water. Well, there was this research to analyze critical thinking on regular people that actually produced these oaks in which they were asking people to donate in order to help save the endangered Pacific Northwest tree octopus. And there were thousands, if not millions of people that actually wanted to collaborate on this, which is non-existent. It's an oaks. And it just demonstrated how little critical thinking is on regular people nowadays. Okay? And so once it was revealed that it was an oaks, a lot of conclusions were made, right? And it says, for example, it must be true. I read it on the internet. Elusive tree octopus proves how gullible web generation is, right? And so I have a final task for you. And with this, we're going to call it a day. I have a final task for you. I have 4 images on the screen. Image number 1 is of a leaping shark that won the National Geographic Photo of the Year a few years ago. Image number 2 is about a creature that can age backwards that was found by researchers not that long ago. Image number 3 is of a giant squid that washed up on a California beach a few years ago, a giant squid. And image number 4 is about a giant camel fossil that was found in the Arctic. 2 of these 4 photos are a lie. They're an hoax. Using your critical thinking skills, I want you to tell me which 2 out of the 4 are a lie, which are not real. Take your time, analyze the photos, and tell me which 2 out of the 4 are not real. Let's see if you can find them. Ludmika says 1 and 4. So you're saying that 1 and 4 are not real. Isabella says 2 and 3 are not real. Interesting. Very good. Gisela says 2. Nitsi says 2 and 4. Thank you. Let me give you the answers.
None of
1
them.
and 4, number 3. Okay, let's take a look. The first one was the photo of a leaping shark that won the National Geographic Photo of the Year award before. And that is false. The photo, if you look at it, it's too perfect to be true. This is the real photo of the shark that won the, this is the real image that won the award. Now, when you compare it, you see major differences, right? So what we need to train our students on as we teach them English is also to perhaps telling if a photo is real, looking for a source. Where does the photo come from? Is there a photographer's name? Can you find any information about them on the internet? Look for clues in the photo. Sometimes the direction of the light and the shadows is wrong. Is anything in the photo too big or too small or too perfect? Is anything missing? And with that analysis, we can actually realize if the image that we're being exposed to is real or not, right? And we're using critical thinking. We're analyzing, we're evaluating. See my point here? Number 2, a creature that can age backwards. That is true. It does exist. And again, we can do a simple Google research and we're going to find that there's this creature that apparently could live forever. This amazing species has the ability to age backwards from an adult stage to an immature stage over and over again. And we have the name, we can look it up on the internet and realize through evaluation and analysis if the image is real or not. Okay. Number 3, the photo of a giant squid that washed up on a California beach. That is false. And again, you look at it and you question your assumptions. A giant squid measuring a whopping 160 feet. Is that even possible? Bigger than a whale. Analyze details in the photo. Evaluate the source. If you get a photo or any piece of information from a source that it's called the lightlybraised-turnip.com, chances are it's not real. Chances are it's just an hoax or perhaps a meme, right? This is the actual photo of a whale that was found on the coast of California. And this is the actual squid. So what they did was simply to Photoshop that. Okay. So what we're talking about is simply the ability to help students develop critical thinking by questioning assumptions, by analyzing evidence, by evaluating stories' credibility. And through that, we can empower our students' use and handling of the language. The last one was a giant camel fossil that was found in the Arctic. Some of you said this was true, and you were right. This is true. And it's all over the news. And yes, even though camels are typically related to deserts now, apparently the Arctic was a desert millions and millions of years ago. So there are fossils of camels, of giant camels in the Arctic. And you can Google it up, you can look it up, and you're going to find prestigious publications like the BBC, and even scientific forums talking about this. Okay, you can go to real live web pages in order to enhance your practice of English and also trigger critical thinking further. And so, as my time is up, I don't want to take any more of your time, and so I'm not going to play the video that I had planned to use. But I want to conclude my session by reminding you of the power of real-world content and what we've covered today. The power of real-world content has to do with how it drives motivation, how it gives students a purpose for real communication through topics that are meaningful, purposeful, and relevant. Real-world content makes language learning more effective and more memorable, and it helps students develop the skills they need to succeed in this century by providing them with tools that have not only to do with language skills, but also with 21st century soft skills that are pretty much the ones that employers all over the world are looking for. So the invitation, it's for you language teachers to start using real-world content as you teach and practice English. And with that, allow for students to learn English in a far more comprehensible, meaningful, and resourceful way in order to access 21st century successfully. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your participation, for your attention. And I understand that we have now some room for questions. So if you have any particular questions to ask, I'm all yours. Also, if you want to get a copy of this presentation, or if you want to get familiar with what we do at National Geographic Learning, there's our contact information on your screens. Drop us a line and we'll be more than happy to assist you. Thank you very much. And I'm open to questions now, if any.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much again. So now we have this time for questions. Tenemos esta oportunidad para hacer todas las preguntas, dudas. El chat está abierto. Les voy a pedir que, por favor, si tienen la oportunidad, no solo dejen sus preguntas, si quieren prender sus cámaras, también lo pueden hacer para esta parte de las preguntas. Si todo sale bien, ok, aquí hay una pregunta, dicen para Benjamin, if digital versions from your books, do they have printable activities? Benjamin?
Hola, ¿cómo están? Okay, can you please repeat the question? If the digital versions have?
If they have some printable activities that you can bring into the classroom, they're asking?
Yeah, well, inside each series that I presented has a companion site. In those companion sites, you can find worksheets. It means that if you select the digital component, okay, you will have access to different worksheets that can be printed. So the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. There's another question over here for Stephanie. Yeah, Stephanie's here. Is she here? It was about, do you have support material for the teachers? So no, so let's continue. If there's any other question in the chat. So I think that was kind of like the only question that we had until now. I think that, well, that was amazing. Thank you very much to all of you. I think we're gonna like stop the questions over here unless we have any other doubt. Okay, no, okay. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for to all of you for being here and being part of this amazing book fair.